We don't know. Why are certain people chosen for manifestations like this, or miraculous occurrences? We don't know. The two children, Jacinta and Francisco, they died within a couple of years. They died of the flu. The Blessed Mother told them they would die. And they'll be in heaven soon. They're declared blessed. They're the youngest declared blessed, one step away from sainthood, canonization in the history of the church. Sister Lucy, she became a nun, a Carmelite nun, and she lived till 96 years old. I think she died in 2004 or something like that, and her cause is being put forward now. They have a miracle for her. And the request for prayers, praying the rosary and making sacrifices are still, well, it's still something that's relevant today. A little bit on culture war scene. I don't know if it took place yesterday. Did you hear what was supposed to take place yesterday at one of the nation's most prestigious universities? Have you heard? A black mass, a satanic mass, which is a mockery of the Catholic Mass, was supposed to take place at Harvard University. The president of Harvard was defending it, saying, well, we want to explore different cultural experiences. And the Catholic priest, who's the chaplain there, said, well, this is a mockery of the Catholic Mass. And at a black mass, usually what is done, they try to obtain a consecrated host, to desecrate the host, to really ridicule the host, and they do horrible things, sometimes at black masses with the host, to desecrate it. And one of the students who was promoting this saying, well, it's just a piece of bread, so whether we get a host or not, we're not sure. But someone told me that it didn't take place. It was supposed to take place at 8:30 last night. And the point of this is, it shows the mentality of secularism carried to its logical conclusion. Well, and relativism. I mean, if there's no truth, then why not worship Satan? These people, most of the students, claimed not to believe in Satan. They just liked the idea of Satanism, the idea that, as Anton LaVey says in the Satanic Bible, the basic premise of Satanism is do what thou wilt. Do whatever you want. You're the God. Make up your own rules. He said that's really what we're promoting here. But, Harvard started as a divinity school. It was a Puritan divinity school. And now it's off the deep end, so to speak. Anyway, we're going to continue today with that handout I gave you. I'd like you to go to page 1, though, because I missed saying something yesterday that I wanted to point out. Well, in regard to contraception and the idea that it violates the 5th commandment, it's as Martin Luther said, it's the murder of future people. You can't really murder a future person, but it's preventing them from coming into existence. And one of the points I make, I do marriage preparation. If you're ever getting married, okay, and one of the churches here, you'll take marriage preparation. And one of the points I make in marriage preparation to couples is that you've been given this ability to procreate, to bring forth new life with God, cooperate with God in bringing new children into the world. And God wants us to be generous, be fertile and multiply. God doesn't want us to just say, oh, I have 1 kid or 2 kids and that's it, no more. He wants us to be open and generous in regard to life, bringing new life into the world. And one of the reasons, well, from God's perspective, He wants heaven to be populated with people. That's why He made us. Love and life are inseparable. God is love. He brings forth life. And people having children, most children, unless they become priests or nuns like myself, most children get married and they multiply exponentially. That's how the world got populated. okay? I mean, you have, you know, husband and wife here, okay? And they have, you know, children, they have children, and then, you know, they'll have children, so on and so forth. They'll have children. So each child, unless they become religious or never marry, which is kind of rare, because most people are called to the vocation of marriage, will multiply exponentially down to the end of the world. When you think about that, you just look at one child, and then this child has children, this child, and then I think you see the immensity of the evil of you know, we don't want any more children, or preventing children from coming into existence, or snuffing them out after they're conceived in abortion. And I wanted to tell this little story about a woman I used to bring communion to in one of my former parishes. She was known affectionately as Ma Cain. Ma Cain. When she died, she was about a month shy of 100. And Ma Cain was the matriarch of a family in the little town I was in. She was head of this family that I had a lot of people from her family that were Cains or married. Their names were changed, but they were Cains. Okay? Her children and their children and their children. She had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. And a good part of my town and the population of my parish was Cains, descendants of Ma Cain. And Ma Cain, I think, was the fifth child, the last child in her family. And it caused me to think, what if Ma Cain's parents had, you know, been selfish and said, you know, we don't want any more children, and she was never conceived? Well, then she would not have been born, then she wouldn't have had children, and their grandchildren, and their children, and whatever, okay? I wouldn't have had my town populated with about a third of the people, because there would not have been Cains. So that should cause us to reflect on the one hand, the beauty of husbands and wives being able to bring new life into the world, and the responsibility, because with marriage comes a responsibility to cooperate with God's potentially life-creating love and bring forth new life into the world. Yesterday, I drew a little, you know, diagram showing, you know, just do that quickly again, okay? God, okay? The Father and the Son, you know, the Father eternally begets the Son, and he loves the Son eternally, and their love is so perfect. There's a person, that's the Holy Spirit, who is the fruit of the love between the Father and the Son. And marital love reflects this, okay? Because you have the husband and the wife, their love cooperating with God's love, okay, generates new human life, a child who is the fruit of the love between a husband and wife. Okay? And just to keep that in mind, how human love is supposed to reflect divine love. It takes three to get married because it takes three to love the man, the woman, and God. And God has to be a part of this. Now, if we go back, turn to page 2 on the sheet I handed out yesterday. Okay? The Comstock laws. Okay? These were laws in the late 1800s through the mid-1900s, preventing the distribution, basically, of contraceptives. And the reason for this, and I'm going to go back how people thought years ago. Okay? Back in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, men would use contraception only with their mistresses. A wife wouldn't think of allowing her husband to use contraception. No, our lovemaking is to generate children. That was the mentality. Men wanted contraception so they could have a mistress and just have sex with her. She was a sex object, basically. Give me pleasure, and I don't want children. I don't want that responsibility. You're just there for me to use. And in order to prevent this immorality, the adultery with mistresses, these Comstock laws were passed. That was the mentality back then, that only women or you would only use contraception with your mistress, because it was unthought of really to use contraception with one's wife. Okay? And the women objected to this as well. I have a little sheet here I'll hand out just to make the point a little more strongly. It is an article written by a man named David Reardon, and it's called The Seduction of Feminism. And if you look at he kind of summarizes the views, the mentality of early feminists back in the 1800s, the 19th century. Okay. The second paragraph on the left, first column, most of the early 19th century feminists espoused a conservative morality. The next paragraph, one of the chief goals of the founding mothers, as they're called, was to reform sexual abuses in and out of marriage and the marriage bed. And they emphasized two basic concepts: mutual fidelity, that's what marriage is, you're faithful, and mutual respect. First, they condemned male promiscuity, which contraception for one's mistress facilitated. Okay. They denounced the social injustices which compelled their sisters to degrade themselves in lives of prostitution. Prostitution is a horrible practice. I mean, women do this because most of them, they see no other way out. They're destitute. They're selling their bodies. I mean, it's really horrible. I lived a block from Rush Street in Chicago when I was in law school, and I saw the women. I had an apartment. I could see them down selling themselves on the street corners on Friday nights. They'd be standing on the corner. Men would stop the car. They'd get in. They'd be back 5-10 minutes later, out on the street corner again. Really sad. Anyway, the next paragraph at the bottom left-hand column. Second, they demanded respect for women as marriage partners. Wives, they insisted, cannot be treated like prostitutes, available on demand without regard for their feelings, desires, and health. And that's what contraception facilitated. Okay? Use contraception, you don't care about the wife's health. Okay? I want sex all the time. Okay? It feeds this mentality. Anyway, they didn't think that the woman should be viewed, that the wife be viewed as the husband's property. Okay? That's the third paragraph there. And then when you see in the middle column, birth control and abortion, these twin demands for marital fidelity and marital respect led 19th century feminists to take a strict view toward the appropriate means to procreate. Procreation could be regulated. Feminists condemned artificial contraception methods as unnatural, injurious, offensive to women. They believed that the use of contraceptives in the home would only further entrench women into the role of being sexual objects for their mates. Contraceptives will deny women their rightful fertility, turning wives into little more than prostitutes, always safe for their husbands to exploit to satisfy their passions. Widespread contraceptive use, the feminist urge, would also encourage promiscuity, undermining their call for mutual chastity. Because this is what it did. If men had contraceptives available, well, they can go out and have a mistress or go to a prostitute. Okay. Not good for fidelity. So the next paragraph, feminism's founding mothers also condemned abortion. They thought it was immoral to kill a child, and the next paragraph, second, they asserted abortion was just another tool by which women were exploited. So you know, those quotes I put in my article that I handed out to you. So anyway, back to my sheet here with the rid of print. On page 2, the top, after I talk about the Comstock laws, what most people don't realize, as recently as maybe not 50 years ago, but it was in the mid-1960s, there were state laws that prohibited even doctors from dispensing contraceptives to a married couple. State laws prohibited this as late as the mid-1960s because they saw contraceptives as immoral and being a gateway to infidelity, divorce, all kinds of bad things. Okay? Now, in 1930, I put this in bold because this is, it's rather a, you're welcome.
Hello.
Seat, okay. In 1930, the Anglican Church of England, at the Lambeth Conference, it was a meeting of their bishops, okay, they became the first Christian denomination to break away from the traditional teaching and allow contraception only for married couples. They said, well, sometimes couples need this, and a few other Christian groups followed, but most Christians, and even non-Christians, some, still consider contraception evil. Now, you've heard of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was a Jew. He did psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis, you know, he studied human nature, okay, tried to just to learn it. Some of his theories are not in agreement with the Catholic view of the person, but you know, on this he was right. He said, it is a characteristic common to all perversions that in them reproduction is put aside as an aim. This is actually the criterion by which we judge whether a sexual act is perverse. It departs from reproduction as its aim and pursues the attainment of gratification independently. Well, that agrees with Catholic teaching. Masturbation, oral sex, any of these perverted forms of sex, because they don't have procreation as their end, as their goal and aim, okay, it's a perversion. And he recognized contraception as being there too. And here's Gandhi, the Hindu. There is hope for a decent life only so long as the sexual act is definitely related to the conception of precious life. So these are non-Christians even, recognizing that this truth ingrained in us that there's a link between love and life, between the unitive aspect of the marital act and the procreative aspect. Cannot be broken. Now, Pope Pius XI, who was the Pope at the time of the Anglican Lambeth Conference, later in 1930, he issued an encyclical called Casti Connubii on Christian marriage. He condemned contraception. And these are paragraphs from his encyclical. Okay, for no reason, however grave, may be put forward by which anything intrinsically against nature, like contraception, may become conformable to nature and morally good. Since therefore the conjugal act is destined primarily by nature for the begetting of children, those who in exercising it deliberately frustrate its natural power and purpose sin against nature, commit a deed which is shameful, intrinsically vicious. And then paragraph 55, small wonder therefore if Holy Writ, that he's talking about Scripture, okay, bears witness that the divine majesty regards with greatest detestation this horrible crime, and at times has punished it with death. St. Augustine notes, intercourse even with one's legitimate wife is unlawful and wicked, where the conception of the offspring is prevented. Onan, remember him, we studied him yesterday, the son of Judah, did this, and the Lord killed him for it. Okay. So this was the common mentality of the Christians throughout the ages. The Anglicans departed from this. They were the first to do so. Not surprisingly, all the Christian denominations that, in the wake of the Lambeth Conference in the 1930s, they got on board with this and agreed that contraception could be used. Well, they all support abortion today. See, there's a link between abortion and contraception. You need it for a backup when the contraception fails, which it does. Okay? And anyway, just to show, go to the next page, because I was amazed when I learned this back 20-some years ago. The next first full paragraph. A secular newspaper, the Washington Post, March 22nd, 1931, responded to these Protestant groups saying contraception was okay. Now, the Washington Post, does anyone know what the Washington Post is? It's one of the premier, you could say, liberal newspapers in the country. Okay? The Washington Post, you know, they promote abortion on demand, they promote same-sex marriage. You go down a list of what we call liberal causes, they're in support of it, okay, today. And it's like the New York Times. Okay? It's a big newspaper, and you know, really against what the Catholic vision is in moral issues. Well, back in 1931, just to show the mentality of people, okay, when a couple of these denominations said, oh, contraception should be allowed, the front page of the Washington Post quoted a Lutheran professor from St. Louis Concordia Theological Seminary. His name is Dr. Walter Meyer. I put the link here. You can get the link. Okay? Just look that up, and you can see Protestant denunciations of contraception going back, you know, 60, 70 years ago. Dr. Walter Meyer said, okay, second line there, birth control, as popularly understood today and involving the use of contraceptives, is one of the most repugnant of modern aberrations, representing a 20th century renewal of pagan bankruptcy. It is reprehensible for several reasons. It sets aside the divine injunction, be fruitful and multiply, and a long list of scriptural endorsements of parenthood. It tends to degrade motherhood, to weaken marriage ties. This wasn't a Catholic. Okay? This is a Lutheran pastor writing this. Okay? And then, more amazingly, okay, you turn to the editorial page. I have a copy of this Washington Post. I got it on microfilm. I copied it off. I forgot to bring it today. I'll show it to you. It's amazing. Okay? But I pulled it here. The editors of the Washington Post, okay, they said this, okay, because the Federal Council of Churches went along with the Anglican Church in 1931. And the editors, the Washington Post editors, say the Federal Council of Churches in America some time ago appointed a committee on marriage in the home, which has now submitted a report favoring, quote, careful and restrained use of contraceptive devices to regulate the size of families. It is impossible, say the editors, to reconcile the doctrine of the divine institution of marriage with any modernistic plan for the mechanical regulation or suppression of human birth. The church, now, church with a small c, they're talking about like Christianity in general, okay, because they weren't Catholics writing this. Okay. The church must either reject the plain teachings of the Bible or reject schemes for the, quote, scientific reproduction of human souls. And this is the heart of it right here. Carried to its logical conclusion, the committee's report, if carried into effect, would sound the death knell of marriage as a holy institution by establishing degrading practices which would encourage indiscriminate immorality. The suggestion that the use of legalized contraceptives would be careful and restrained is preposterous. Okay? It would encourage indiscriminate immorality. Well, the whole, you could say, foundation of our sexually promiscuous society today is really founded on contraception. And the idea is, you know, have what the pagans will call safe sex. Have sex where you won't have a child. Well, yes?
Can I use the restroom, please?
Now, just to continue our history, in 1960, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case, Poe versus Ullman, upheld as constitutional state laws which prohibited contraception. And it was based on the rationale that contraception was regarded as immoral in itself, that it led to premarital sex and adultery. But 5 years later, the Supreme Court reversed that. It's a famous case, Griswold versus Connecticut, departed from the natural law and held that, this is the Supreme Court, such laws which prohibited contraception were unconstitutional violations of a couple's right to privacy. And it was this Supreme Court decision that invented the so-called right to privacy. Turn to page 4. That is found nowhere in the Constitution, by the way. And this right would be used 8 years later. This was their plan, once they got the Supreme Court to accept this notion of right to privacy, to use the right to privacy for a right to abortion in Roe versus Wade. So, legally, the legalized murder of unborn children through abortion began with legalizing contraception. So, now, in 1968, Pope Paul VI issued a historic encyclical. In the Latin, it's called Humanae Vitae. That means of human life, on the transmission of human life. And he did this, you have to understand the historical circumstances. In the late 1950s, especially the early 1960s, the birth control pill was invented and became widely used. And some people were saying, well, this isn't like using a condom or something like that. It's just a pill. So why isn't this, this should be allowed? And the Pope said, no, we can't allow this, the contraceptive pill, because you're preventing a human life intentionally from coming into existence in the context of the marital act. And human life and human love are inseparable. You can't exclude one and have the other. Okay? And he predicted the dire consequences if contraception became accepted. And that's the next paragraph. That's a quote from the Pope's encyclical, from paragraph 17 of Humanae Vitae. Responsible men can become more deeply convinced of the truth of the doctrine laid down by the Church on this issue if they reflect on the consequences of methods and plans for artificial birth control. Let them first consider how easily this course of action could open wide the way for marital infidelity and a general lowering of moral standards. Not much experience is needed to be fully aware of human weakness and to understand that human beings, especially the young, who are so exposed to temptation, need incentives to keep the moral law. It's an evil thing to make it easy for them to break that law. Well, what he's saying here is that if you pass out contraceptives to, say, young people, as they do in the high schools, public high schools here, pass out contraceptives. Many high schools throughout the country. What are you telling people, young people, to do? You're giving them the green light. Okay? Go out and use contraception. This is fine. Have premarital sex. As long as it's, quote, safe, meaning you won't have a child. But there's faulty reasoning there because it's not safe. 1 in 5 people, these are statistics from the, has anyone heard of the Center of Disease Control? Anyone ever heard that? Yeah. You know where it's located? It's Atlanta, Georgia. It's the Center for Disease Control in the whole country. They keep records of all the figures of diseases and epidemics, things like this. The Center for Disease Control, if you go on their website, you can find the rate of sexually transmitted diseases. And right now, in this country, 1 in 5 people has a sexually transmitted disease. 20% of all people in the country has a sexually transmitted disease. Actually, sometimes more than one disease. About 1 in 5 people in this country or close to that has genital herpes. you know what a cold sore is on your lip? Well, genital herpes is that in that area, and there's no cure for it. Condoms don't prevent genital herpes because it's skin-to-skin contact. Pills don't prevent it. No pill or condom or anything prevents genital herpes. And another one, the human papillomavirus. A condom doesn't prevent human papillomavirus infections, which render women sterile and or can render them sterile and cause cervical cancer. And it's usually undetectable in women. It'd be worth your while to get on the CDC website and look at some of these diseases because it really is an epidemic proportion. You don't hear about this because no one wants to talk about it. It's kind of an embarrassment. And anyway, the Pope predicted this. Back in 1968. Actually, back in the 1930s, the Washington Post was predicting this. Common sense tells us that, okay, if you make contraceptives available, well, it really opens the door for marital infidelity as well, because if you know that you can have sexual relations with someone and not get pregnant, it just is maybe a temptation that someone can't resist if they're off with someone and not their spouse. Well, this is the weakness of human nature, and this is what popes and editors of newspapers realized not so long ago. But today we're really not thinking rightly on this issue. And as I go on to say in the middle of page 4, the birth control pill is a misnomer, misnamed. It allows for neither birth nor for self-control. Because if you're on the birth control pill, you can just have sex all the time. There's no need for control. Rather, it prevents the conception of new human life, allows for the uninhibited sexual activity, the pleasure of sex without the responsibility of the child. And there's another thing that the pill does. I have to mention this, just so you know. Okay? I'll say a couple of things. Sometimes doctors will prescribe a contraceptive pill to teenage girls who have an irregular monthly cycle to get their cycle regulated. Okay? There's nothing wrong with that in itself. Okay? What's wrong is if then people are having sexual relations. Oh, I can have sex without responsibility now. No, that's what's immoral. Okay, so sometimes doctors will prescribe this, although I don't recommend it because I've done the research, and good Catholic doctors won't recommend it either because of the harmful effects, the other side effects of the pill on women in general. Okay? It's linked to birth. It's linked to breast cancer. There's a definite link. The Journal of the New England Journal of Medicine has published reports on the studies. The birth control pill is linked to breast cancer and all kinds of physical harmful side effects. Blood clots. If you opened up a birth control pill sheet with all the warnings on it, the warnings are in small print. You have a sheet this long going through things, that possible bad, harmful side effects of the birth control pill. That's just physical harm. Okay? What the Pope is talking about here is morality. And also, and this is another fact that you have to be aware of, the birth control pill acts as an abortifacient as well. The birth control pills that they use now, they use a lower level of estrogen in order to prevent ovulation. That's the primary method how the birth control pill works. It prevents the woman from ovulating. So, because it's really telling the body, you're pregnant all the time, don't ovulate. Okay? And, but the low estrogen birth control pills that are used now, they don't prevent ovulation all the time. They estimate that there's a breakthrough in ovulation about maybe 10% of the time at least. So 1 in 10 times there's a breakthrough ovulation, which means there's an egg that comes down the fallopian tube, and there's a backup method for the birth control, and it says it right on the instructions, that it prevents, well, it renders the endometrium, which is the lining of of the womb inhospitable to implantation. So human life is conceived in the fallopian tube. The sperm goes up the fallopian tube, new life is conceived. It takes a day or two later for that new life, the embryo, to travel down the fallopian tube. Then it has to implant in the womb. And the lining of the womb is rendered unable to take the implantation. Okay? That's the backup method for the pill. Well, what is that in reality? That's early abortion. Okay? So, another reason not to use the birth control pill. The sad result, as I note here on page 4, rampant immorality, adultery, fornication, an epidemic of sexually transmitted diseases like genital herpes, incurable, which 1 in 5 Americans have, especially those in a sexually active age range between 15 and 40. It's even more than that. I think it's 1 in 4 people have this disease. And as I say here, God always forgives. Man sometimes forgives. Nature never forgives. And we go against nature and all kinds of bad things happen. Dr. Robert Kistner, Harvard Medical School, who helped to develop the birth control pill, he later lamented, "For years I thought the pill would lead not to promiscuity, but I've changed my mind. I think it probably has." And contraception provides, one of the foundations for our sex-crazed, promiscuous society, because it allows the sex act to be separated from its primary purpose, the generation of new life. Now, I quote Paul VI in Humani Vitae at the bottom on page 4. Okay. Another effect that gives cause for alarm is that a man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to the woman, and disregarding her physical, emotional equilibrium, reduce her to being a mere instrument for the satisfaction of his own desires, no longer considering her as his partner whom he should surround with care and affection. Well, that was basically the same thing that the feminists were saying in the 1800s. The contraception would encourage the man to use his wife as an object rather than as a loving companion. Okay? And page 5, okay, in the years between 1970 and 1980, with the spread of the contraceptive pill, because a lot of people went on it, the divorce rate doubled in the US. No accident. The social scientists looked at these figures and they said, well, why did contraceptive use, when contraceptive use went up, okay, you had 2 lines on a graph, one contraceptive use, the other divorce. Okay? They're almost the same track. Okay? Why was that? Well, the social scientists couldn't explain this, but we can, because once a couple uses contraceptives, well, they want to exclude intentionally a child from their act. Okay? By doing so, whether they realize it or not, they're excluding God from their act. Okay? And fruitless sex, childless sex, is godless sex. And God has to be the flame that fuels the love between husband and wife. When the husband and wife are saying, we don't want a child, they're really excluding God from their act. And it ends up reducing the act to just a physical thing that's taking place rather than this beautiful spiritual reality. When a couple is making love, they're open to God's potentially life-creating love if they don't use contraceptives. And God is in the midst of this act. It's a sacred action. It's a holy action, the marital act. They're renewing the marital covenant with every act that they're doing, if they're open to God's love. And, well, as I say here in the bold, well, up on the top of page 5, why is this, that the divorce rate went up? Well, by violating God's unchanging marital laws, couples fell out of God's love and His grace. See you tomorrow, our last day.